Okay, I know people are still going to come in, but let's get started. Good evening, everybody. Look at this beautiful crowd here of Banana Slugs tonight. So exciting to see all of you. Welcome to our Inspire series, a first-of-its-kind opportunity to connect with our slug community and hear from some of our most exciting faculty at UC Santa Cruz. What a joy to be here tonight with alumni and friends and families from across our campus community. UC Santa Cruz is honored to host all of you tonight. My name is John Pine. I am the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement at UC Santa Cruz. The UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association is over 150,000 alumni strong, with nearly 10,000 right here in the San Jose area. We host many programs across the country and back in Santa Cruz to help you stay connected, and I encourage you to keep in touch and continue to join us at future events. I also know that we have many parents and families of our current students in the room. We are excited to count you as a part of our community and thrilled to have you here. Now, before we begin, I'd like to ask some of our most dedicated UC Santa Cruz volunteers, members of our current or past members of our UC Santa Cruz Alumni Council and the UC Santa Cruz Board of Trustees. If any of you are here in the room, can you please stand and be recognized? There's a couple. Yeah, there you are. Thank you. I encourage you, please introduce yourself to one of these folks and let them inspire you to become more involved with us at UC Santa Cruz. Now, this Inspire series has brought together alumni, parents, and friends in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and today in San Jose to gather and learn about some of the biggest ideas coming out of our university. I'm excited and indeed inspired about the future of UC Santa Cruz. And speaking of that future, I've never been more excited because we recently just finished our newest strategic plan just about a year ago that set us on a more focused path as a leading global research institution. Now, let's watch a very short video to learn a little bit more about that plan.
UC Santa Cruz is on an incredible trajectory. For nearly 6 decades, the innovative research and creative scholarship done on our campus has expanded and challenged how we understand the world. We are charting a course that builds on our long-standing strengths, and we're identifying ways we can achieve even more. Our new strategic plan, Leading the Change, will guide our work for the next decade. This shared vision builds on 5 core themes. We will provide more hands-on learning opportunities for undergraduate students while expanding offerings for elective courses in the colleges and divisions. We will pursue new programs that support graduate student success, their professional development, and career goals. We will grow our impact by enabling more interdisciplinary collaborations by strengthening our research infrastructure. We will work to advance an inclusive and supportive environment by creating a campus culture rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion, improving our hiring practices, and fostering a sense of belonging. We will work intentionally to address the impacts of climate change and plot a course to decarbonize our campus while continuing to carefully steward our land and water resources. We see an even better future ahead with the intentional and dedicated work of everyone in our campus community. That vision will become our reality. Join us on this exciting journey. Learn more at strategicplan.ucsc.edu.
That video reminds me of the great work happening at UC Santa Cruz, but it also reminds me we have the most beautiful campus in the world, don't we? Now, it is a great honor that I have the chance to introduce our Chancellor, Cindy LaRive. As a first-generation college graduate, Chancellor LaRive has been committed to student success, inclusion, and equity. At UC Santa Cruz, she has prioritized improving retention and graduation rates and eliminating equity gaps for students from groups traditionally underrepresented in higher education. Chancellor LaRive is an accomplished chemist. She's encouraged the participation and success of women and other underrepresented groups in STEM and has received several awards for her teaching, research, and leadership. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor LaRive.
Thank you, John. There's plenty of seats over here on this side if you want to have a chair. It's great to see a sold-out crowd, and you're in for a real treat. I think you'll be glad you came. It's just really exciting to be here tonight in San Jose at this amazing museum, and I'm so happy to see so many smiling faces. Thank you for being supporters of UC Santa Cruz. Our network of alumni, parents, and friends is already strong, and it's growing even stronger. I appreciate your connections to our campus and being such vocal advocates for UC Santa Cruz and for the whole UC system. UC Santa Cruz continues to be on a remarkable trajectory. We have a track record of groundbreaking multidisciplinary research, distinguished scholarship, creativity, and innovation. Our faculty make an impact not just by advancing their fields, they help us imagine the world as it can be. They view their research through the lens of creating a more sustainable, just, inclusive, and equitable world. That is what makes our university unique. Climate change has been studied by academics for decades, but the fast emerging reality of climate change and its wide-ranging impacts have made it one of the most pressing issues of our time. Our Center for Coastal Climate Resilience was born out of the need to build coastal resilience in the face of a problem literally at UC Santa Cruz's doorstep. Our faculty, staff, and students are deep in this work, and they're developing creative ways to address the issue, examining, and in some cases already implementing nature-based solutions, advancing adaptation approaches, supporting climate justice, and so much more. This Inspire series was born out of a desire to pull back the curtain on the work unfolding on our campus. Climate resiliency is an ideal topic, and this evening we hope to spark some new connections with you and between all of us. When was the last time you felt inspired? When was the last time you learned something new? When was the last time you pushed the boundaries of your understanding of such complex issues? That's what our faculty and our students do every day at UC Santa Cruz. And tonight's panel discussion with two outstanding speakers will give you a taste of just how invigorating that experience can be. So now I would like to invite our speakers to the podium, and I will tell you a little bit about them. Borja Gonzalez Reguero is an associate professor of coastal science and policy program at UC Santa Cruz. He works at the intersection of climate risks, coastal adaptation, and engineering. And Borja takes an interdisciplinary approach to climate resilience, working in close collaboration with different partners in the United States and internationally, including the U.S. Geological Survey, FEMA, the World Bank, and the insurance industry. He's interested in informing policy and developing innovative solutions to climate impacts, such as nature-based solutions and engineering with nature. He also holds a PhD in civil engineering and in environmental hydraulics. He has a master's degrees in coastal and port engineering and in applied economics. What versatile training. I'm so excited to see how you're applying that, Borja. Heather Tallis is a senior fellow with our Center for Coastal Climate Resilience. As an interdisciplinary scientist, she works to bridge nature, the economy, and people's lives. Dr. Tallis served as President Biden's policy advisor on nature in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she drove cross-agency action on nature-based solutions and advanced efforts to account for the nature in benefit-cost analysis. In previous work with the Nature Conservancy and the Natural Capital Project, she has sought to center science, human-centered design, and innovation in climate decisions made by local communities, by governments, and by the private sector. She also works as an independent advisor for multiple sectors, including the World Wildlife Fund, the California Academy of Sciences, and global engineering and technology companies. So I'm excited to ask these folks some questions and more excited even to think about what the answers are going to be. So first, thank you, Borja and Heather, for being with us here tonight. I wonder if you could each just give us a short elevator pitch about the climate problems that you're trying to solve.
Sure. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's great to be with you. I work on problems that are in places where the issues of climate change and nature loss collide. So we hear a lot about the front lines of climate change and the impacts that those are causing. In a lot of cases, those are made worse by declines in biodiversity in the natural environment. And so I'm interested in that intersection, what we can learn from both our understanding of the environment and climate and how we can provide solutions to both of those at the same time.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here. So my work focuses on climate hazards and how they affect coastal communities and infrastructure, right? And what we can do about it. So it means that I look into coastal hazards such as wave climate, waves, and extreme sea levels. I look into coastal processes, so how shorelines are changing, what are the flooding and erosion impacts, and the socioeconomic effects of storms. And then I look into climate adaptation solutions and specifically nature-based adaptation, so how we can use nature to adapt and reduce risks. So some of the work that I've done, for example, is looking at how climate change and global warming has been increasing the power that waves have, right? So I have a lot of questions, obviously, in this state about, is that good or bad for surfing? So you can ask me later. But I just look at, that climate change signal in increasing global wave energy. The other things that I've done with USGS, the US Geological Survey and others, is looking at the value of nature for protecting people. So providing coastal protection values and also just as a pure natural infrastructure system, right? That we can use not to value the conservation value that they have for flood mitigation and erosion control, but also how we can use nature to adapt and provide coastal protection services.
Well, you're both so impressive in your resumes, and you've been in such important positions, the government and internationally. I wonder, from that vantage point, what you think makes UC Santa Cruz's work in this area unique.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I will respond to that question as from my own experience, right, as a postdoc. So not as a faculty now, but I will highlight two things: the interdisciplinary work that we do. So I was very fortunate. I'm originally from Spain. I came from a traditional engineering school. I can tell you a little bit more about my trajectory after. But then if you tell me that, I ended up working in a postdoc with ecologists, with social scientists, with engineers, with economists. So I think that was true because I was there in a postdoc with the Nature Conservancy and the reinsurance industry in a campus that allowed that kind of ecosystem, right, for interdisciplinary work. And I see that now as a faculty as well. The second thing that I will highlight, and that's also true for my postdoc, is if you would have told me when I applied to UCSC as a postdoc from Spain that I would be ended up working with the largest multilateral bank in the world, the two largest reinsurance firms, like leading engineering firms in the US and internationally, I wouldn't have believed, and also with the largest conservation organization who was also sponsoring my postdoc at UCSC. So I wouldn't have believed that the kind of the learning experience that I had as a postdoc, as a student, and I was very privileged to do that. And that was also something that I think it was unique about that campus, that offer, just because they have that kind of networks and partnerships, I was able to leverage those opportunities. Right?
So we did not coordinate our answers beforehand, and I'm going to say exactly the same two things. Certainly, I think UCSC is unique in the multidisciplinarity and the collaborative environment. There's plenty of places that advocate and champion, working across disciplines that don't feel quite that collaborative. And UCSC feels very collaborative for real in practice, and That to me is incredibly valuable and incredibly exciting. The second part, I'll just rephrase the way Borja said it, which is to focus on solutions and the openness to science that drives solutions. I intentionally spent most of my career not in academia with a PhD because I wanted to be in institutions that really valued driving impact. And I didn't have a lot of belief that universities really do in day-to-day practice. And now coming back to UCSC after many years, it's really heartening and exciting to see an openness and a real investment in faculty and students and programs and initiatives that drive impact. So just as an example, I've only been affiliated this round for about a year, and we've already hosted a workshop with the insurance industry and hosted a session at New York Climate Week with state legislators, and I've done work directly with Microsoft on bringing science to their climate investments, and all of this is applauded, which in a lot of other contexts, I have literally gotten questions about the value of that kind of science. So I really appreciate and am excited about the openness to that at UCSC.
Yeah, it's kind of part of our DNA, I think. So I wonder if each of you could just talk a little bit about how the work you're doing is driving change, and whether that's with private industry or with the federal government or the World Bank. Maybe you can give us a concrete example.
Sure. I am very interested, as you just heard, about driving change. I've mostly done that in my career in two ways. One, through the science that I do, to answer questions that are relevant to creating change so that people can't say as their response, I don't know, or we don't know enough to act. But then also working directly with decision makers to change policy or to change decision processes. And I'll give one example from my work in the federal government the last couple years in the White House. We worked on a very unsexy decision process called benefit cost analysis. It is one of the core decision-making analyses that every federal agency does, in most cases required by law to do a benefit cost analysis, so that when an agency makes a policy change or an investment in a program, they're sure or they're convinced that the benefits that society will receive justify the cost of taxpayer funds. Conventional benefit cost analysis leaves out a lot of environmental benefits and costs that actually affect us in our daily lives. And so those are misleading analyses when they're done in that way. And that's been the convention for almost 30 years now. So just to take a very extreme example, if there was going to be a decision about opening an area for oil drilling, there would be a close look at the benefits that will come from that fuel supply, fuel security and independence, and revenue streams, and the costs of extracting that resource and managing the infrastructure and implementation, and possibly permitting processes. The effects that would happen on society that the federal government would pay for through climate change were not counted in the benefit cost analysis. So there's real costs through climate change to our healthcare services of people having more exposure to heat stress or more exposure to air pollution and respiratory disease from forest fires. There's more direct cost to the federal government and to you as taxpayers when flood risk increases and damages from billion-dollar extreme weather events pile up. So those are all real costs that are paid. They don't magically disappear because they weren't on the balance sheet originally. And so a lot of federal decisions have gone on for decades without this transparency. And so we worked in the last couple of years to put forward really clear guidance and a standard for how all federal agencies can do benefit cost analysis in a way that accurately accounts for the benefits and the costs that happen through environmental change for any federal government program or policy.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, so in my line of work, I work on coastal hazards and try to drive cost-effective action with communities in the U.S. To build resilience to flooding and other impacts. Right? So that means that that we need to work with agencies and partners in the private sector as well. So let me give you a few examples of the work we do with some of these partners. So with the federal government, we had now ongoing collaborations with the U.S. Army Corps, with NOAA, with the U.S. Geological Survey, with FEMA in trying to use pre- and post-disaster mitigation money for nature-based solutions. So part of the work we have done, for example, put a dollar value to coral reefs in the US, and that led to declaring this year coral reefs as a natural infrastructure system by the US Coral Reef Task Force, which is essentially the body who has to manage coral reefs in the US. But that has also led to new legislation in Guam, US Virgin Islands, and just last week in the Mariana Islands, right? So you can see this law is based on science that was developed here in this campus with federal partners like the USES. With the US Army Corps of Engineers, we are also deeply involved in the Engineering with Nature partnership. We will have now an ongoing partnership with them for the next 5 years, looking at how to use nature-based solutions for coastal protection, right? With another agency, with DARPA, for example, we are doing a lot of work in artificial reefs. So essentially, how we can design self-adapting artificial hybrid reefs that have both a biological, ecological, and engineering design features that can essentially grow with sea level rise, right? So that's kind of like rocket science for coastal engineers, like a structure made of concrete or hard materials that can grow, right? So there's a lot of innovation in both the biological, ecological components as well as the engineering side. Like we are using 3D printing of concrete, for example, that allows a new area of innovation in terms of how you will design typical coastal structures with a lot of things that we have never been able to explore before. So with the private sector, we have also a number of partnerships. I want to highlight probably the work we have done with the reinsurance industry because I think it was quite innovative and impactful. So we, starting with my postdoc, there was also a lot of interest about how to use nature in the industry. A number of collaborations with Swiss Re first and then Munich Re after, which are the two largest reinsurance firms in the world. That led us to design the insurance for coral reefs in Mexico, which was the first insurance for an ecosystem ever, and then the replication in Hawaii. And now there is also a number of other initiatives in the rest of the Mesoamerican Reef and also in the Pacific. So that's a really good example of how we collaborate with NGOs, but also the insurance industry, governments as well. And we developed the science that was able to inform that kind of policy, right? And also with the engineering sector, we're doing a lot of collaborations in natural infrastructure, these kind of hybrid science as well. And even all the way to the UN and the multilateral banks like the World Bank. So we have a long-lasting partnership with the World Bank. We have done, particularly we focus about how to bring nature-based solutions in their portfolio and in their investments. Just last week, for example, the director of the Coastal Climate Center was in DC presenting some work that was done in our campus about how to value mangroves and the flood reduction benefits they provide and potential mangrove restoration and mangrove loss scenarios, right? So that goes into the Changing Wealth of Nations report that is published by the World Bank, I believe it's every 5 years. They tell what is the trajectory that all the countries are taking, not only in GDP, but also natural capital and other assets. So part of the work we did went into the marine chapter of that Changing Wealth of Nations report. So those are a few examples of how we try to work across agencies at the federal government, but also state agencies here, even with local communities, but also partners in the private sector and international organizations as well.
Can I just build on one thing? Borja kind of cruised by the fact that their research led to the designation of coral reefs as natural infrastructure. And I just want to amplify how significant that was for other policy changes. This language might sound kind of weird that we're calling nature infrastructure, but there's a lot of decisions in the federal government and in multilateral banks in all kinds of contexts where people are thinking about infrastructure, right, and solving problems with built stuff. And once you actually translate what we know about nature and the environment and how it can help with those same problems into the language of infrastructure development, then all of the decisions and all of the structures and all of the funding for those programs can think about how we can build with nature and how nature matters in those built places. And so the fact that the national designation was made for reefs was part of the fodder for another major policy that the Office of Management and Budget put out that asked all federal agencies to consider nature-based solutions for resilient infrastructure of any kind for any purpose. So that request has been made to all federal agencies to think about how we can make bridges more stable or stream banks more stable or our houses safer from floods with nature. That door is open now, in part because of the work that showed what nature can do in protecting coasts and leading to the first designation.
Yeah, maybe, and I will highlight that we didn't do that in the vacuum. I mean, it was like a long-lasting partnership with the U.S. Geological Survey, and many years of collaboration that led to that kind of partnership. So the other thing that I think is also unique about UCSC is like the partnership we have with NOAA, and increasingly with growing with the USGS. So just by building those partnerships, you can have that kind of impact. Otherwise, just working as academics on our own, I don't think you're going to be able to translate that into that kind of legislation.
Yeah, so it's all very exciting, and some people build seawalls, nature-based solutions. That's a different approach. What do you see as the main advantages with a nature-based solutions? And I wonder if there are particular challenges that they bring as well.
Well, I'll say one of the main advantages that people are increasingly excited about and recognize is that nature-based solutions often have multiple benefits, while our conventional engineered solutions are usually really good at doing one thing. And so when you have the option to invest in a nature-based approach, you can often achieve multiple outcomes instead of just one, which in just monetary terms is more cost-effective, in social terms is more beneficial, and in some cases, nature-based solutions can be even more effective at that one thing.
Yes.
As one quick example, one of my favorites is from Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast. There were some areas that were hit by that storm that had natural dunes still in place on the beaches and natural dune grasses. Those were fairly well protected from the storm surge and the flooding, and the houses were much less damaged. In places where there were concrete seawalls, they were effective for a while, but then some were damaged and literally became like vaults for the waves to go over and damage the areas behind them even more. So in that case, even the engineered solution that was specifically designed for that purpose wasn't as effective as the nature-based approach, the natural environment that was in place. On the challenge side, I mean, the reality is that in some cases, nature-based solutions can take more space physically. So those dunes take more space than a vertical seawall, or salt marshes in the San Francisco Bay take a lot more space than riprap. And they can take a little more time, sometimes, not always, to start to produce the big benefits that people are looking for. So people can be impatient and have short time frames. And so, for example, for that salt marsh to establish and really do a lot of buffering might take several years, whereas a built seawall or some other infrastructure could be in a year or so. So those are some real challenges that we have to take into account. There might not always physically be space to effectively bring nature back in the middle of a context where we're trying to solve a problem, and we might not have the time or might not think we have the time, but very often that's more of an assumption than a reality.
Yeah, and maybe just to follow up on the Hurricane Sandy example, because we did some work after Sandy, and these results were not ours, our models, right? That a bunch of academics just built on the, on the research money. This actually was working with one of the lead modelers for the industry, putting wetlands in their model and quantifying how much risk reduction the wetlands provided for Hurricane Sandy, and it was about 20%. Right? So these are the leading modelers in the industry who are actually telling their insurance how much the insurance policy is going to cost and how much they will pay in such of events, right? And they were telling us like it was 20%. You get like 20% less damage just by those wetlands. So we did that kind of analysis, and it was very informative and impactful in the industry because it was coming from one of the models. It was a, academic model or paper telling, this is the value of wetlands. So I think that's increased also the interest in the industry to start thinking about some of these solutions. So in terms of MBS pros and cons, I mean, I do a lot of work in this area. I think first, I just need to tell you guys what I understand by nature-based solutions, because it's such a broad term that is used these days in every aspect, right? So typically, if you look at the UN, it's going to tell you that nature-based solutions are this umbrella concept that is managing, conserving, and restoring ecosystems for climate adaptation and mitigation benefits, right? With environmental benefits as well, obviously. But I really like the definition of the US Army Corps, because I'm an engineer and I have that bias. And they just look at engineering with nature or nature-based infrastructure in a way that they can align natural processes, and that's flows of sediment, nutrients, water, and engineering processes in such a way they can provide benefits for the environment, for society, and for the economy, all right? So it's just a different way to do engineering for them. And they have been really successful in developing, it's maybe, it's difficult to believe, but the US Army Corps is one of the leaders internationally, actually, in developing nature-based infrastructure for climate resilience benefits. And they are just looking at it from a purely engineering problem. So I really like that kind of thinking about nature-based solutions, right? Or at least in my line of work. In terms of pros and cons, I get at that question a lot too. The things that I will say, yeah, definitely one of the main benefits is that they can provide multiple benefits. That's one of the main characteristics. The second thing is they can be cost-effective in many areas, particularly for communities and in countries that have the less capacity to adapt. They already have these coastal ecosystems protecting them. So, just restoring and enhancing those protective values is one of the most cost-effective strategies. In terms of challenges, I will say, it depends who you ask. So if you ask ecologists, and I work with both groups, so you ask ecologists, say, oh no, engineers need to give us more technical guidance. We need technical manuals, and codes. If you ask the engineers, we'll say, oh no, we need more pilots and we need more experiences. And we need to work with the other fields to make these pilots, because we can learn from them. So the truth is we need both, right? So engineers know enough about these systems, about those processes, that they can be creative about the solutions they may propose to a client. But they don't know everything, so they need to work with ecologists and others to just bring these biotic aspects into biological and ecological components into their designs. So we need to work together, and we need more knowledge base, we need more experiences, and we need also more technical guidance. And probably the biggest elephant in the room is financing. So there is very little money going into adaptation. And this is not only for this country, it's a global problem. We are putting a lot of effort for a very good reason into climate mitigation, but the fraction, we are only putting a fraction of that into climate adaptation to deal with the impacts of climate change and climate risks. And I think that's very true for nature-based solutions. It's not receiving enough funding and financing, and it's really difficult.
So social equity has always been an important value for our campus. What does your work say about who is most impacted by climate change and how we address it?
So not my work, but a lot of other people's work has shown that indigenous communities are one of the groups that are hardest hit by a lot of climate impacts. And they also have a ton of knowledge and experience dealing with changing climates over their histories. And so I think a big challenge we have is bringing enough recognition and visibility and engagement to indigenous communities, both so they can be part of solving the issues that they're facing, but also so when they want to share that knowledge and that experience, we can learn from that as well. I did have the opportunity in the White House to work on an amazing initiative that was led by many others to write the first U.S. federal guidance on indigenous knowledge. It firmly recognizes indigenous knowledge as an important form of evidence that should be considered in all federal decisions, and guides agencies in how to appropriately engage with indigenous communities to bring them into decision-making processes and to recognize their knowledge appropriately. So I think that's incredible opportunity to build on, and I'm very lucky to have met several Indigenous leaders through that process that I'm continuing to collaborate with, and I'm very excited about. I'll actually go this week to Seattle to meet with a Lakota leader and a Cree leader, and we're jointly developing an idea for an Indigenous-based solutions summit, where they hope to bring a lot more visibility to the opportunities Indigenous communities already have for investing in nature-based solutions through them, and bring more awareness to those communities to the kinds of financing that is available. But I think most interestingly, they also want to bring visibility to long-standing and endlessly evolving Indigenous ideas about finance and economics that have not been part of developing what we consider right now as nature-based solutions or how we finance them. So I think there's a really rich space here to make a lot more room and recognition for ideas from across the spectrum, and especially foreground people who are being directly impacted, and give them opportunities to respond in their own ways.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I wish I could go with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there is a lot of scientific evidence that shows that natural hazards disproportionately affect vulnerable communities the most. So there is a lot of research in the US looking at flood risks, so freshwater flooding, just because of urban development patterns also. There is a number of factors. In coastal areas, in my own work, we have demonstrated, so getting to these coral reef studies that we have done for the entire US. What we found is like if you, so there is approximately like 3,000 kilometers of coral reef line coast in the US. 10% of them, we call them $1 million reefs, because they are providing you at least $1 million in flood protection, right? So you will say, if you run out the cost-benefit analysis, you say, you know, I have a case to invest $1 million per section in just conserving that infrastructure if I don't want to pay more in flood costs. So those $1 million reefs are highly concentrated in two areas, in Hawaii and Florida, just because the assets, the houses are valued more. So if you take the economic metric out of the analysis and you look at where natural infrastructure, coral reefs in this case, are providing the highest risk reduction value or percentage change, right, it's actually in Puerto Rico and the territories. So those communities are the ones that are getting, you know, if you leave this dollar value aside, the biggest protection from the existing ecosystems. We have a paper that will be published very soon that shows the same thing for Florida and Puerto Rico in terms of reef restoration, right? So not looking at what is the conservation value, but where we could restore reefs and who will get the biggest benefit of those. And we saw the same thing, like vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities in Puerto Rico get actually the biggest return, right? So this is just one example. It brings an interesting perspective on how we allocate adaptation investment. So we were talking about cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis, right now, we just put dollars, right? So if you have higher value houses, then the benefit-cost ratio is going to make more sense. So we are working with the industry, but also FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps in trying to figure out other metrics that we can use so that cost-benefit analysis better reflect the risk reduction that we are offering communities, right? We also have a number of projects in the state of California looking at who pays and who gets benefits from adaptation investments, right? So where and what type of adaptation strategies we're going to implement, and who are going to pay for them, and who are going to get the benefits of those, right? Because if we just do this on a purely economic dollar value benefit to cost ratio, it's not going to be reflected of all the adaptation benefits that we could distribute. So the spatial distribution of those adaptation benefits is a social equity factor for sure.
So this one's a little bit tricky maybe, but we'll have to ask it. I think everybody's thinking about it. So this year's presidential election will usher in changes in how the U.S. government addresses climate change nationally. How do you see this affecting your work and climate progress in general?
Borja told me I had to go first on this one. So, I mean, there's absolutely no question that a lack of U.S. national leadership is going to slow things down. There's just no question. But it does mean that there's going to be a lot of action in other places in other ways. We saw this before, right? This is not the first time. There's been a shift in where climate leadership is going to come from. States are already organizing. Cities are already organizing. There were organizing infrastructure still in place from the last version of this. And so there's a lot of opportunity to continue to drive action. Certainly, it doesn't help if the U.S. isn't strongly leading, but it doesn't mean the impacts of climate change care who the President of the United States is. Climate change doesn't care, and climate change doesn't care who you voted for. So the impacts are going to continue to hit hard. And so I think there will continue to be interest in how to recover from these events. They're going to continue, and how to better prepare for them, reduce the risks, and stop them from happening. So I think the language will change, and I think the centers of leadership will change, but I don't think the effort and the interest will change at all. And so in my own work, we have worked this way kind of for over a decade, just because in general, what people care about a lot in these contexts is the economic returns and the social benefits. And so a lot of the research that's been building up uses those terms, right? Borja has been talking about it, cost effectiveness, multiple benefit pathways. All that is still here, it's not going away, and we have a lot of the language and the evidence to make the cases for investing in nature simply being a good sense investment to make, sort of regardless of what the primary thing is that you care about. So I'm going to continue to work in that way. I know a lot of other people will, and I think there's going to still be a huge and increasing need and a lot of interest in making progress.
Yeah, oh boy. So I'm from Europe, so I shouldn't be even answering this question. But look, I mean, what is very clear is like probably the climate and environmental agenda is going to be affected, right? But I think everybody these days in the US working on climate-related research is trying to figure this question out, right? So how it's going to be affected and when. So it's pretty fair to say that the climate and environmental research agenda will be affected at some point. However, I do concur. I mean, at the end of the day, at least in my line of work, it's about costs and it's about impacts to people and the socioeconomic effects. And those are not going away in these next 4 years. Actually, if I can forecast you the future, there will be more bomb swells like the ones that affected Capitola in California. There will be more El Niño events, which is a main coastal management issue in California. There will be more hurricanes in the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. And the trends are pretty clear. And if you put those trends into a dollar metric, it's even more clear where the trend is going. So this is costing more, and every year, every decade is costing more. It's not only the climate drivers that are driving those trends, it's also developing patterns and other factors, right? So that will continue, and we saw the reality this year with events in Florida, with those hurricanes. We just need to find those incentives to work with these agencies and partners and communities to see how we can help them adapt and manage those risks. I mean, typically Florida will not be as one of your examples for climate change, advocates. But I can tell you that they are doing amazing things in trying to move the artificial coral reefs and coral reef restoration strategies forward. So you wouldn't be thinking about that as a climate change strategy, but they are actually thinking very heavily in how they can, essentially protect all the property they have exposed to hurricanes and how they can adapt to this, manage this climate risk. And we typically refer to as climate risks. There are different drivers. There are short-term drivers. There is internal availability like El Niño here, and there is also, long-term effects, right, of how climate change is changing. So I think if you enter the discussion into finding those types of incentives with the communities or your counterpart or the government or whatever agency, you can find those alignments that help you to use the science to inform these kind of solutions. That has been true for me in Florida, in artificial reefs, but has also been true, for example, in Mexico, working with the hotel industry and the government in the insurance, right? So at the end of the day, we just need to be driving innovation and be creative about how to find those incentives.
Well, before we wrap it up and go back to the reception, I have a couple of audience questions for you. So the first one is, at what rate per year does the ocean decay the coastal regions, and how do we slow it down?
Senior engineer.
So the coastal decay, you mean the coastal hazards or the?
Yeah, I think that, so,
Oh, yeah.
we see it in Santa Cruz, right, on West Cliff
Yeah.
Drive. So can you give an idea about the rate at which damage is happening and how we slow it?
Yeah, sure. So bad news. So the wave energy is increasing and it's changing, and then the waves essentially dominate all the coastal dynamics here in the West Coast, literally, right? So it's going to tell you what is going to happen with the sediment, with the beach, and the stability, and how much sediment transport we're going to have. So there are some projections. The U.S. Geological Survey have here in Santa Cruz, the Pacific Center have done amazing work in projecting where are the coastal flooding and also coastal erosion scenarios for the future. So there are some studies that show that the stability of beach areas could be compromised like throughout the century, but in the next few decades. So that's bad news. We also have new data that shows that sea level rise is accelerating more than we were expecting, right? So you may have heard from different sources, but typically you will look at the historic rate is about 3 millimeters per year globally, right? And there are areas that are increasing more and others less. If you are in Louisiana, for example, then the land is also sinking, right? So you have a 10 millimeter relative sea level rise. So the land is sinking and the sea level is rising at 10 millimeters per year, which is a lot. So it's 10 centimeters in 10 years. So, and then the most recent observations and measurements from satellites are pointing that the rate is actually increasing even more, right? And that's really bad news, because we were thinking that up to the mid-century, it was kind of linear. So it was increasing, but not that really impactful yet. And after the mid-century to the rest of the second half of the century, it was going to be picking up. And that's where the difference in scenarios and uncertainty is so important, because if you get a sea level rise of 0.6 or above 1 meter, it's going to change the situation very drastically for many communities. So the latest observation is that rate of change has been increasing in the last decade. So now is becoming more accelerated. So all these effects on what happens with the mean sea level allows you to get more wave energy, more storm surge, more flooding, and also have the capacity of waves to act more like a bulldozer on the beach and essentially be more, have more erosion potential, right? So what is going to be driving the coastal change and coastal management decisions for the next few years or decades in California is going to be what is going to happen with the storms, how frequent, how intense, and also probably the big elephant in the room is what is going to happen with El Niño years, right? Are they going to become more frequent, more intense? Because what happens with El Niño is they shift wave energy. So the waves are slightly larger and coming from a slightly different direction. And this is why we have so much erosion in California. And that's only a few degrees. That's only a little bit like bigger waves and slightly from a different direction. And we get so much erosion during El Niño just for that. So now you think about what is going to happen in 30, 40, 50 years. And we are doing a lot of work to try to project that. And that is going to be the big changer, the main dominant driver. The same thing happened with the bomb swells last year. So the bomb swells were not extraordinary waves by any rate. They just came from a slightly different direction in a moment of the year that they should have not, right, with particularly higher levels. And that essentially is what produced most of the damage. So just a few degrees in the main direction of the energy, changed everything.
Well, and we get another storm coming here very soon, so we'll see how that goes. So last question. You're going to have to reach a little bit. Can you update us on the communications language between whales and humans? Can we understand them? I will answer this one. I don't think I can understand them, but I think there are scientists who are working at how to decipher what they do. And I learned recently that orcas actually have like dialects that within their pods where their family groups are, they talk to each other, and it's different than the next orcas over who talk. And so that's kind of interesting. So I think there will be hope. We will understand them. We may not be so good at talking back, but they're pretty smart creatures. Well, thank you all for your questions.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I always like to say when we finish this, they're real people. They're really here. So you can go ask them whatever you want, and they understand the assignment. So please do that. Please come and chat with them. I also want to mention we have another great faculty member here, the dean of our Baskin School of Engineering, Alex Wilkes over here. Alex, you wave. So another person, you can feel free to ask whatever you'd like to, Alex. I offered you up. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. We're so happy to have you. The galleries are reopened. There's more food. There's more drinks. Let's go have some fun. Thanks for being here.